So by the time we're 35, we've had so many of these combinations go on. We've all had inflammation. We've all had blood sugar irregularity, and we've probably, I mean, without a doubt, we've all had stress due to one reason or the other. And so cortisol has been constantly secreting, willy-nilly for years. So when we get to perimenopause phase, it's exhausted and cortisol is not secreting or compensating like it used to, which then starts to affect our hormone production.
You're listening to the LabAroma podcast with me, your host, Colleen Quinn. At LabAroma, we believe the secret to truly effective and therapeutic plant medicine is by understanding our plant science and backing it up with evidence. And this week, I bring you JJ Pursell. JJ is a phenomenal mind when it comes to herbal medicine and herbal apothecary in general. So JJ is a 2007 graduate from NUNM with a doctorate in Naturopathic medicine and a master's in Acupuncture and Oriental medicine. So a really diverse, beautiful scope in terms of her background and education. She began working with herbs over 25 years ago, and her career has always centered around plant medicine, and plants they're in her soul at this point, and you will hear that inside the podcast. Now, her book that first came out 13 years ago was The Herbal Apothecary. It is incredible. I have it on my desk and it is my go-to. It doesn't matter whether you are an herbalist, an aromatherapist, a plant enthusiast, or someone who just wants to lean into plants to deal with your day-to-day conditions and moods and situations, then JJ's book is one of those go-to books that you can just reach for and learn so much from. I talk about the book, and it's one of the reasons we have her on the podcast is because JJ's book is one of my most tortured, dog-eared and written on books that I have in my extensive library, and no better reason to get the woman and the brain behind all of those beautiful words onto the podcast. So without further ado, I bring you JJ Pursell. Okay, JJ, thank you so much for doing the LabAroma podcast with me. We have so much to talk about.
Oh, I'm excited. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I'm going to jump straight in. Normally I start with how you got to where you are today, but I'm actually slightly excited. Can we go straight to psilocybin? And can you, because we be asked about it all the time, and I'm not qualified to advise people or educate people, so I'm so happy we've got a voice. Can you talk to us about what is it? So mushrooms as a whole, and we have done a few podcasts on mushrooms as an adaptogenic supplement for our wellness, which is great, and the audience loved those. But the LabAroma community are now asking about things like psychedelics, but also like psilocybin and microdosing mushrooms and all of that world. How has this become the monster that it is becoming today? And is this monster justified?
Oh man, that's a good question, and there's just so much to talk about. So
we have time.
Let me just start with my background, so
please
people know where I'm coming from.
Mm-hmm.
I've been familiar with psilocybin for over 30 years and used it for my own health and well-being, primarily for working through difficult points in my life. And to gain perspective and to help work through, previous trauma, blocks that I was feeling in my life that were inhibiting me to move forward. But fast forward to a few years ago, I live in the state of Oregon here in the United States. We passed a Measure 109, which was brought to the voters to institute psilocybin in a medicinal therapeutic setting. So that has really catapulted the ideas and thoughts and how can we bring this into a more medical model. And that alone, that medical model has created a lot of triggers for lots of different people, rightfully so. So for the last 2 years, here in Oregon, there's been an Oregon advisory board for the psilocybin. And I am not a part of that board, but I've been participating, and basically all the rules and regulations, from how will we regulate growing it to how will we regulate producing it to facilitator training to facilitator centers has to all be written, and rules and so on and so forth. In the meantime, you do have a whole group of people who are being discounted, and those people are the people that have used psilocybin for a millennia through their customs, rituals, traditions, tribes, you name it. So we need to incorporate that aspect as well, which is not getting as far as some of us would like to see. So,
And sorry to interrupt, JJ. As you describe this process, it feels a bit like cannabis in the same challenging manner in terms of regulations and politics, in that it's become this regulated thing, or it's working towards being a regulated thing. But you have all of those legacy growers that just were never considered in the process,
mhm.
and now are either have gave up. I hate that term, give up, but they've been forced to stop doing the thing they've done for decades, and farming the plant that they always intended to pass down from generation to generation, and now they just can't because of regulation. It feels like the difference here with psilocybin is that those legacy consumers, or those legacy producers, are at least being thought of at this point. Am I hearing that correctly or not?
I
Am I
would
being
say that
romantic?
they are being thought of.
Okay.
Um, definitely being thought of and advocated for.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, the proposition that was brought to the Oregon Advisory Board 2 weeks ago was voted down to protect religious and ceremonial use of psilocybin. So there's more work to be done. Um,
Yeah.
and that's a whole can of worms, right? One that does,
A whole other podcast.
yeah, it's shocking, I guess is the word, that we are still having to even have this conversation, to be quite frank. We don't own psilocybin. It's not even in a white person's legacy or heritage in any way, shape, or form. And yet here we are again staking claim and making regulations around its use. So there are some strong people working very diligently. What this will, I'm kind of jumping around, but what this will ultimately, my guess is result in, is that the underground people doing the work will stay underground. And then they'll have, you'll have different tiers of people following regulation, some in between, and then, perhaps the true originators of the work staying pure in their customs and cultures and traditions. So, so here we are, right? And we've just had this massive boom in the last 3 years. There's been articles in the New York Times called "Mommies Who Microdose," and you have massive commerce getting behind this. The difference is with this regulation is cannabis was developed to have a consumer customer relationship. You will not be able just to walk into a psilocybin store and purchase psilocybin and take it home and use it. You'll still need to be with a licensed facilitator from a licensed facilitating center. So there is a little different there.
Yeah, that's a positive thing, I assume.
Again, I think it depends on who you speak to, for, people who are very experienced and have a lot of um, experience sitting with themselves for that, they'll continue to do so, right? They'll find their resources or means or grow it themselves and continue to do so. Do I think we should have, immediate access to walk in anywhere and get psilocybin and take it home and use it? I mean, for someone who's never done that, that could be risky, But then again, I don't want to make claims to what people should or shouldn't do with this medicine because it's very individual. So we have two ways that we take psilocybin. We take it in the microdosing form. So the microdosing form,
What does that look like?
yeah,
Like, break that down for us. So, like, what's a microdose?
yes.
And how, do you take it in a powder format, in a capsule?
All sorts are out there now. So surprise, surprise, you can order it right off the internet at this point. And FDA is not stopping that from occurring. So you can buy it in capsules, you can buy it in drops. If you grow it yourself, people will just take off a little pinch and eat it. It's really up to you, but I find the capsules to be the most easy to take and readily available. So that's going to be anywhere from like a zero point 0.1 to a zero point 0.2, maybe a zero point 0.5 microgram dosage. Zero point 0.5 would be a little bit, stronger than more of a macro dosing. But what you're looking at with those smaller doses is there's no hallucinogenic effects. What people experience in general, again, this is a very broad experience, but people feel an uplift in mood, a focus and clarity, uh, ability to get through the day, feeling um, a lot more calm in their emotional well-being. There are several ways that people dose, and James Fadman is probably who I would turn to. James Fadman or Paul Stamets. They're the two amazing folks that have dedicated their lives to mycology and psilocybin use in conjunction now with that. And they've got protocols that they recommend. It can be like 3 days on, 2 days off. Some people I know take one day and then they don't take another one for weeks, or a month. Um, what I have found for myself personally, because I feel comfortable speaking from experience, I find that that can help calm people.
Yeah,
Um,
super helpful.
I'm just a normal person that has used myself as a guinea pig, and I find when I'm just going through. I don't have clinical depression. I've not been diagnosed, but I've definitely gone through periods in my life with low points of just like, oh, whether it's the world getting me down, or I'm exhausted from motherhood or exhausted from professional life. Um, any of those things can just put you in a rut from time to time. And when it goes on for longer than a week, it's kind of nice to have an ally to reframe, refocus. And that's what I find microdosing can do. It kind of hits that reset mental button and allows you to see the joy in your life and connectivity and positivity, and just allows a little bit of gap between that, oh, this is so heavy, and but look at how wonderful it is to be a human and to be alive. So that is the
Sounds
microdosing
amazing.
space.
I have a friend who microdose. I have a few friends who microdose, but one in particular who, with all the cliches that are there in this space, he's the least likely person I ever would have thought would have said to me over dinner, "Oh, by the way, I've started microdosing." I would have thought I would have said that to him 20 years before he said it to me, and I was fascinated when he said it. So she's going to have to explain why. And the big reason for him, well, he started it because he was aware they can bring clarity and focus, and that was his aim. But actually, what it's done for him, and the reason why he's such an advocate now is, and I don't know if I'm going to articulate this well, but it describes it that he is now much more connected
Mhm.
in his day-to-day life. So he's much more connected with his children. He's much more connected with the people in work. He says that he is much more present in everything he does. And when he started microdosing after a few weeks, and he became profoundly aware of this, it made him, and he's about 56-ish. He said that what it firstly made him realize was that he was so disconnected from every element of his life for years and years before. And he cannot believe that a mushroom has completely changed how he treats people in a kind, like, not, he's a beautiful human, but he's much more connected, much more present, and he just feels like a much more kinder, calmer person, which is a beautiful way to describe it.
I love that. So let's talk about why it does that. Like, how does it do that? Right?
You tell me, I
Yeah.
haven't a clue.
So, and that's true. It creates that, and that's the whole. If you did see the New York Times article, "Mommies Who Microdose," that is a huge point that they talk about in the article, is that connection. So we run on autopilot, right? We have our lives. We're very busy, and we're just kind of going through the motions every single day of checking the things off the list that we must do. And what that is from a brain perspective, from a neuro perspective, is we're running in our brain's default mode mechanism. Okay, default mode network is what it's called. Now, this network is truly established between the ages of 6 and 12. So your neurons are kind of set in how you think, perceive, feel, act based on your experiences between that time frame. Now we have growing experiences and we learn, and hopefully we learn from mistakes, but we all know that that doesn't happen easily. So over time, even though we're having these new experiences and we're going out in the world and seeing new things, we tend to filter back through that default mode network process. This is why it can be really hard to change habits. It's not impossible, but it can be really, really hard because when you have a pathway that fires from neuron A to neuron B, then you have the results of neuron C. So it goes A, B, C, and then C. Let's say you have a coworker that just, man, you guys, you have tried to get along, but every time you engage with them, you can feel that like tension, that
It just doesn't work.
what's that?
It just doesn't
It just
work.
doesn't work. And so what ends up happening is neuron A recognizes, oh, there's the person. Neuron B makes the recognition, oh, when you see this person, you tense up. And then neuron C raises your heart rate, starts to make you sweat a little bit, tenses up your stomach. So this is an autopilot sensation that's happening at this point. And to change that, you have to do something I call neuronal repatterning, which is you recognize the person, you instantly come up with a color, a mantra, an image that pulls that from firing from B to C to B to F, a new pathway that sees a beautiful rose in your garden and doesn't end up on that C pathway. That's really hard to do. Well, psilocybin, what it does is it actually turns off the default mode mechanism. So in the microdosing, is that happening to the fullest extent? No, it's not. That's more in a macro dose. So anywhere between like 2.5 to 3 grams is what's going to give you, or higher. But clinical research really says higher doses don't really create bigger or different effects. They can create more dissociation. But that sweet spot between 2 and 3 shuts down that default mode network. Well, then you don't have any of the autopilot neuronal refiring. You have to come up with new ways. Well, guess what? It's studied and found that all those new ways produce feelings of self-love, self-acceptance, acceptance of others, deep connection with the world, deep connection with people around you. That's your actual auto default. But we have, as a human, created this other way of functioning to survive in life. And so this is what microdosing and macrodosing do. They give you the opportunity to turn that other part off, even if it's just a tiny, tiny bit. And then you realize, wow, look at all these people around me. Like, look at these people that I love and that love me, or look at this, person that needs help, or look at myself. Like, I can't believe I've been talking to myself that way or treating myself that way. And so it gives us a moment, again, that little breath, that little doorway to see something different, to then hopefully reframe and repattern those neurons to a more positive way.
Which is incredible.
Yeah, I know.
So, JJ, when you talk, and I'm just going to think, I'm going to talk about my macro dosing now for a second. When you talk about how like microdosing will not necessarily do that reframing, but macro dosing will. Does it do that and excuse the stupid question, but does it do that reframing and that's it done? Or is it a case of we might slip back into old patterns and
Yeah. I mean, the default
you're
mode
nodding?
mechanism has been cemented since,
Of course, of course.
for years, if not decades.
Mm-hmm.
So, what it does is it gives
It's
you,
not magic. You're not going to turn that
you're
off
not,
overnight.
no, but slowly over time, you start to make a choice. Like, you can see those old patterns firing, and you do have that new pathway available to you. It's just not been exercised as much as the other one. So when a pathway is formed, the more you use it, the quicker it'll fire, because it's just like greased to like quick fire, quick fire, quick fire. So when you have a new neuronal pathway firing, it's not been greased. So you do have to have that consciousness, which you regain in a normal state of mental health, brain awareness. So then you have that consciousness of being like, you know what? I'm going to try to fire this way. And that's where we get this switch that really happens is, okay, I've had a little taste of it. I am aware of it. Now I'm back in a conscious state. I'm going to work to try to keep that neuronal patterning going versus that old one.
And I love the way you use the analogy of greasing it, and it makes so much sense. Visually, as a visual learner, it makes so much sense that it's so much easier just to fall into that pathway. And it's like any behavior; it takes time to reframe.
Completely. And, even with patients, I don't have a clinical practice, but I still educate a lot, teach a lot, and consult. But when I tell people, let's say someone who's had a long standing digestive issue, maybe they've been diagnosed with IBS or Crohn's or diverticulitis, this is a long journey of healing that we're talking about. And you're going to ebb and flow many times over the next 20, 30 years. I mean, even myself, who, I'm highly educated in health and how I should be treating my body, I still grew up in the Midwest. I still grew up eating a lot of ice cream and McDonald's. And while I don't eat McDonald's anymore, I definitely treat myself to ice cream, knowing that it's going to not serve my body that well. But there's times in your life you're going to ebb and flow. When you start down that healing path, you make change, you like, I'm in it, I'm going to do it. And you're like all in. And then, 3 weeks later, you're like, you kind of fall off again. But it's easier because you keep picking yourself up. And each time you keep picking yourself up, that those weeks stretch to 4 weeks and then 5 weeks and then 6 months and then you're in a whole nother phase, and you could do really well for a year and then kind of slip off for your birthday, for a week or two, but then you just pick yourself back up. So when I'm talking about helping people change, yeah, like this is a lifetime
Yeah,
journey.
it's a commitment.
It is. And don't beat yourself up over it. Like, this is human. We're all in this together. We all understand it. And so just be prepared to ebb and flow with it and be okay with that.
Amazing. I'm going to ask you a crystal ball question,
Mm.
which is really annoying. But so you're in Oregon, which is, for me, and I've done very, very little research into this world, unlike the cannabis world. And I'm going to leave you guys with psilocybin. So we've been asked quite a lot, is this something I'm going to get into? And the answer is no, because I think my hands are pretty full with cannabis and aromatherapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd rather perfect those, if there's such a thing, than divide my attention. So I'm going to leave queens like you, JJ, to look after this.
Yes.
But so I'm so happy I can't answer this question, so you're going to have to try. Where do you see it going? Because Oregon's really stepped up first, which it did with cannabis to a huge extent as well, which is amazing. I call it the plant state, because you are the guys that just, I feel, have so much respect, and like you put so much weight and power and protection behind plants and fungus and our natural healing world. Where do you see, and like just inside the state even, or if you could stretch outside and look at North America, do you think this is going to grow, that it's going to become something that is just common practice at some point in the future? Or is it going to stay as a very niche, herbal focused tool?
I mean, I have lots of thoughts on that. So, being the first state to roll this out, now that being said, the advisory board will wrap up in a couple months and then present to the Oregon Health Authority. And then the Oregon Health
Mm-hmm.
Authority has to approve this before we even get started, right?
Yes.
So they could say no. I don't.
But you have took the first step,
Right.
and the first step more than anyone else.
Yeah. And I don't foresee that happening, but I think a lot of people don't understand the legal process or the regulation process. Um, many people think, oh, we voted it, in 2 years ago, it instantly happens. It's like, well, no, that there's a step-by-step process, as you're aware of with cannabis. I think it'll be really, this is just my honest opinion. I think it'll be really messy for the first few years.
Yeah.
And I think the other states will quickly follow suit. Um, I think with all the decriminalization that is occurring across the United States, there's just, I hate to say it, there's too much money to be made to let this opportunity go by. And I think there's a lot of people investing right off the bat. And I think that that will drive its growth across the United States. It's a real dilemma. I do see a lot of, for example, facilitator training. So, facilitator training, we already have people setting up here in the state, you know, taking applications and beginning facilitator training programs, which is great. I mean, I'm part of California Institute of Integral Studies. They have a training program. They've been doing it for a long time, but to see this fast tracking here to capture that revenue independently for profit is a little concerning. Um, and then
It's slightly inevitable.
what's that?
Slightly inevitable.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's definitely inevitable for sure. Um, the thing that concerns me is you do have a really high price tag on all of these things. So the accessibility is not being focused on as much as it can. So sure, if you have, five to $8,000 to come to this gorgeous lodge and retreat center in Southern Oregon to have your 3-day, experience, that's amazing. More power to you. You'll be very comfortable, you know? But that's just not hugely accessible. And if we're talking about a substance that can create powerful changes in mental health, which is a priority, should be a priority in our country, then everyone should have access to this. And I'm just not sure how to do that. Honestly, I haven't quite wrapped my head around. I don't know that anyone else has either of how we make this an affordable, and available option for anyone who truly needs it. I'm all for self-exploration. I think it's a really important and commendable thing as a human to do that, but I'm also really, really strong advocate for someone who has severe depression or manic depression or any of these things to have an option or an opportunity to live and see what it's like to live without that for a little while. I think that that's just so important. But I see it falling. I think, yeah, I just think it's going to be a huge wave.
Gonna roll. One last question on this topic, and then we can get into the other area I want to pick your brains on. Do you feel that so let's take example for someone that is dealing with depression, like proper depression, whether it's clinical or it's environmentally stimulated or whatever it is, or let's even say it's event stimulated, like things like postnatal depression. Do you feel like in those scenarios it is better taken under the guidance of someone that's trained in understanding how it works, or do you still think in that case self-exploration is okay?
From a microdose or a macrodose perspective? Um, I think that if you do not have any of the contraindications that are out there, which are, I mean, they can kind of shift, but here's the thing that gets really tricky. So research that's been going on since the 1950s has excluded, perhaps rightfully so, but I am on the fence on this, has excluded certain mental health conditions. It's excluded bipolar, it's excluded schizophrenia. And some people are out there undiagnosed, of course. Um, Now, from a research perspective, they're excluded because they're doing research. So they have a very tight set of regulations that they have to follow. And such diseases as or clinical diagnoses as bipolar and schizophrenia are outside of those tight regulations. So they haven't been able to be included. That doesn't necessarily mean that they should be exempt from this treatment, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they shouldn't proceed with caution. So anyone who has had an experience with a psychotic break or that kind of thing, this can push you towards that. We have seen that. So that you have to be very careful in that situation. Cardiotoxicity is a real thing with psilocybin. So you need to be careful with heart conditions, this kinds of things. So really knowing the contraindications, that's the most important thing before you even dive into this work. That being said, I can't really say. I mean, I want to play this very, very safe. Do I know a lot of people who've just ordered some microdose mushrooms offline and never had tried them and tried them with no side effects? Yes. I know a
Yeah.
lot of people
Yeah.
who have done that.
And
And
so do I.
yeah, and I think if you are feeling that call, then it's definitely worth investigating further,
Yeah.
whether that's, there's a company based in Eugene called Golden Euphorics. They
Hmm.
have a health consultant available there 24/7, so you can make an appointment. You can, it's free, like, consult with that person to
Yeah.
get more
Great
questions.
service.
Yeah, me too. I have people emailing me all the time, just wanting a
Hmm.
little
Hmm.
consultation, like, "Do you think it's right for me?" And I don't say yes or no, but we just kind of go through, all of the things.
Offer insights.
Yeah, because I think just talking through it with somebody can help people go one way or the other. As far as self-exploration in a macro dose, if you've never done it before, I would highly suggest that you find a facilitator. That can be a sitter, that can be a group session, that can be a psychotherapist, that is facilitating. But I would encourage a macro dose first time user to have that kind of guidance. And that being said, there's all different kinds. Now, the traditional that is being pushed is you go into a really comfortable room and you lay down and you have an eye mask and headphones, and that's dreamy. That's lovely. But there's a lot of proponents who believe that they just want to be outside and they want to look at plants and look at trees and sit on the grass, and that's okay too. There really isn't one way that you're supposed to do this. It's finding what works for you and what's going to offer you what you need. And that being said, you don't ever know what you're going to get with a macro dose. You do set intentions and you do think about why you are moving forward with this experience, but typically what comes up is what needs to come up, and that doesn't always mean the most traumatic event of your life. In my experience, that often doesn't happen, and that can be disappointing for some because they maybe have an event that they're ready, they think that they're ready to move through, and it doesn't come to the surface during the session, but that's just because it just wasn't the right thing at that time. And even if it doesn't come up, I've never heard someone say, "Oh, I'm really bummed. I'm really bummed
Yeah.
about that session. I didn't really get what I wanted." You still always almost I've never heard
Yeah.
anyone say they haven't gotten what they needed. It just might
Yeah.
not be what they thought they were going to get.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So interesting. And I know no one can see you on the podcast, but I can. Your face lights up, JJ, when you talk about this.
Oh, I love talking about things that help people. And, if you are walking around not living your life to the fullest extent, no other way to put it. It's a burden. Like, we are here one time, multiple times, whatever your belief, but you're here right now. And if you're not able to find joy in a daily or somewhat regular basis, that's exhausting. And so I've seen this give people that opportunity. And I just think everyone has that right to be happy.
Yeah, I always say that I hope that I live the length and breadth of this life. I don't just want to live the length of it. And I think if you are burdened, especially with mental health concerns or physical illnesses that are even now like things we consider as completely normal, things like living with IBS or living with Crohn's or living with pain. We sometimes we just consider that as part of life.
Yeah.
I think if you're carrying those kind of burdens, it's hard to live the length and breadth of your life, especially in a joyful way.
Yes. Agreed. So,
Mm,
yeah, maybe psilocybin can help.
perfect. Okay, so I want to ask you about herbs for female health.
Oh, sure.
Um, so I'm going to be really direct with my questions
Yeah.
now because I'm fascinated by this topic. So your book, The Women's Herbal Apothecary, is fantastic,
Great.
and we will link to it in the episode notes. So I've had it had it for about 6 months now, and I've leaned into it for a lot more things than I thought I was ever going to, if I'm honest. I thought I'd lean into it like for my section of female health, but now I'm like, no, mom's postmenopausal and there's stuff going on. And, I have friends that are perimenopausal, and I have sisters that have PMT, and I have a sister that's pregnant, and there's all of these things. And it's like, do you know what? Once you're a woman, you just know women going through some stage of female health that you can offer some assistance. And your book has become my go-to manual, even if it's literally just as a reference book. It's like, JJ, I'll have an answer for
Oh,
that. I'll go
thanks.
check JJ's book. So it's genuinely amazing, which is why we want to have you on the podcast. So I will link to it. Anyone that has a womb should get the book. Anyone who knows someone that has a womb, it would benefit you to have the book.
Oh, thank you.
So can we talk about, I just want to talk about two main things. One is focus in menopause, perimenopause, because it seems to be a big thing we're asked about a lot, is lack of concentration, or really struggling to focus in everything, in a conversation, never mind in work, like literally basic daily focus. Where is the plants that we can lean into for that? And the other one for me, I'll give you them both at the one time, is calmness and anxiety. So trying to stay calm when anxiety, that generally is driven by our hormonal imbalances, and that can happen at any stage in our life as women. Is there a way where we can lean into our plants and our herbs to help us?
Yes.
I don't want to say tackle that, but support us through that.
Yeah. Or give you a sense of reclaiming the ability to maintain a calm state of being or presence in your life.
Yeah, or just get back to you and leave the anxiety behind.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I'll start with the latter. So, especially with perimenopause, so we're talking about living 40 to 50 years before this starts. Although I'm convinced perimenopause starts way before.
I'm convinced I'm in it, and I'm 38. Like, I would swear I know I'm in it,
Yeah.
and I'm 38.
Yeah, I think it
And I
starts
think I've been in it for about 18 months.
Yeah, and I think your period, pre-menarche, I think that starts a good 3 years before. So I'm learning all sorts of or having new theories about this hormone train that the female body gets to ride. It's just kind of a whack-a-mole situation. And
That's why we're so resilient, JJ. We deal with hormones. That's why we're the most resilient creatures on this planet.
Constantly adapting,
Yes,
because it's not going to stay
constantly.
stasis your whole life. Oh, no. It's going to change constantly. So it's kind of like having a child. You think you've got it, and then everything, goes out the window, and then you think you've got it, and then you're starting all over. It's the same thing with hormones. And here's the thing that I'm coming more and more to about that, is that you have to look at all of the history before you get to this point. So the two most important, we always go back to digestion, right? I can't tell you. I feel like I just keep banging my head against the wall, but truly, if your gut is not 100%, nothing is going to work right. It's just not. There's just so much that happens in that system. It's why it's so big. But there's just so much that happens in that system. So if you don't have that dialed, your hormones are very unlikely not going to be balanced. But the other one, of course, is the adrenal glands. So here's the thing. You have these two little glands. They're so small. They're like the size of an almond, and they sit right below your kidney on your back. And they just do so much, and they can wreak so much havoc, these two little boogers. So cortisol or adrenals do all sorts of things, right? But they're the ones that do the big gun of cortisol. So cortisol itself, why do we secrete cortisol in our body? Well, we secrete it to keep down inflammation. So that can be acute inflammation or chronic inflammation. So if you are skateboarding down the street and you fall, and then you put your wrist out and you kind of sprain your wrist, like, cortisol shoots to the scene, and it puffs it all up to keep it protected, and then it sticks a flag there that's like, come fix me, and then all the cells come and they do their work. Well, if you have gut inflammation because you're not eating the right things, And this doesn't mean bad things. This could just mean not the right things for you. Or you have an old injury that when you were young, you didn't quite heal right, because when we're young, we're invincible. We don't think about that. And it flares up from time to time. So either one of these reasons, cortisol gets secreted to kind of help keep the fire down, right? So if that's going on all the time, then cortisol is constantly getting secreted. The second reason is cortisol's main reason of being secreted is for blood sugar. So if you are a irregular eater, then your body never knows when it can give up energy and when it needs to hold on to energy. So therefore, cortisol is secreted to keep that blood sugar stable so you can maintain your go, go, go lifestyle. Ideally, we're eating at the same time every day. So the body knows, like, oh, I know she's going to eat at this time. So I can release this amount of energy because I know it'll get restocked. Okay. That's the second reason. The third reason is for stress and emotional well being. So going back to that person that like stimulates that neuronal firing to then like increase your heart rate and your breath rate and make you sweat, that is also then released to calm that sympathetic system back down. So by the time we're 35, we've had so many of these combinations go on. We've all had inflammation. We've all had blood sugar irregularity. And we've probably, I mean, without a doubt, we've all had stress due to one reason or the other. And so cortisol has been constantly secreting, willy-nilly for years. So when we get to perimenopause phase, it's exhausted and cortisol is not secreting or compensating like it used to, which then starts to affect our hormone production, our sex hormone production.
And if you lean into if you had to lean into two herbs
Mhm.
in those scenarios, what is your two herbs for that situation?
If I had to lean into just two, oh
I
goodness,
know, sorry.
I would say
We
rhodiola.
can't give away all the secrets in the book.
Rhodiola
Hmm.
and ashwagandha.
Very good.
So
Yeah.
rhodiola is and ashwagandha, they're both adaptogen herbs. So they're going to bring up what's too low and they're going to pull down what's too high. And they're going to create resilience in that stress reaction. If you're having periodic anxiety or stress throughout the day, I would supplement that with a little bit of skullcap and celery seed for acute. So the rhodiola and ashwagandha, you're going to take, let's
They're
say
long-term friends.
8 to 10 weeks.
Yeah.
You're going to just take it 3 times a day in a tincture or take a nice, tea, a quart of tea a day for 8 to 10 weeks and just kind of nourish that system. I'm a big believer that you need to rotate herbs. You don't be taking the same thing for 6 months. Um, so those would be the first two. And really with that focus, going back to your first question, um, I'm gonna say lion's mane mushroom because I think it's such an important one. But I am a ginkgo, forever true. We think about these herbs that are like, oh, ginkgo, it's been around. We all know it's for focus. Well, but nobody uses it. So
Yeah, yeah.
why are you
No,
using it?
we get the same with essential oils. People will say, clary sage PMT, and you're like, yeah, but is there something else? And I'm like, well, yeah, you can use Divana, and there's lots of other ones, but why are we bored of clary sage?
Right.
If it's working, why are we changing our mind?
I don't know. People need that new thing. They need that, oh, it's the latest and greatest, and I need more.
I'm a fan of consistency and loyalty.
Yes. I mean, there's a reason these have been around for millennia.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, with your study in history and essential oils, like there's a reason lavender has been used or frankincense has been used since the time of Christ. Like, come on, people, let's stick with what we know. We don't need
And
this.
let's stick with what works. I know that we all want everything bright and shiny and new. We're like magpies,
Yes.
but it doesn't always get us very far.
No.
Especially, I think, when we're working with our body. We're really lucky that there is anecdotal evidence, clinical data. There's clinicians that have done this work for decades. They can say, "I know this works." I just think stop reinventing the wheel and let's listen to people like you, JJ, who know exactly what you're talking about. And stop trying to get all magpie about it and use the herbs that work.
Yeah, I agree. And we're going to be discovering new herbs all the time. And I know
Of
that's
course.
really, really tempting. And then,
Mm.
you have some hot shot on TV that's like, oh, this is the latest and greatest thing. And then sales of that go up, but it drops off just
That's not always a good thing.
yeah. It's just
Yeah.
just not worth it.
Amazing. Well, your book is fantastic. It rarely sits on my bookshelf anymore. It's normally on the desk, which is always a good sign. So I'm going to link to it. We could do this all night. I feel like I need a number 2 podcast with you because I have so many more questions. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the work you do, and I'm really happy that you started our conversation on the podcast about psilocybin. So you delivered that beautifully for us. I probably will get loads of questions. So we'll connect to you, JJ, as well in the episode notes. If anyone wants to reach out to JJ directly, you can do that.
Yep.
Just don't torture her. Come to her and help and ask great questions. And if I can help anyone, then just reach out and let's connect and talk more about our plants. JJ, thank you for doing what you do. I can't wait to see you continue to do what you do. And I'm looking forward to seeing how psilocybin starts to grow across our lovely world.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, JJ. Bye. I hope you really enjoyed today's episode with JJ. I found it so insightful. If you loved this week's episode and you find that the friends or family might really like to hear it, don't hesitate to share it with them. And you can also share it on social media and give us a tag. Don't hesitate to go to Spotify, iTunes or Google Podcast, where you can also rate and review today's episode and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode again. I hope you really, really enjoyed JJ. I know I certainly loved having this conversation. Until next time, take very good care of yourself.